Hello and welcome back, everyone, to another recording by Patch.Work.Podfics. This will be a continuation of Quirk class Thaumiel. Today I'll be reading chapters 25 and 26. We can start right away with chapter 25, Sports Festival Incoming. Here's the summary. Erase your head, his saga continues, aka a series of miscommunications. Also, just a bit of an author's note here. Just before writing this, I had reread Hysterical, and Hysterical definitely influences my writing style every time I read it because it's so peak. Okay, so maybe you will see some Spark Fangirl similarities, or I don't know, references almost made in this chapter. Hope you enjoy. Oh, also, Monoma does not canonically declare war on Class 1A. Like, there's so many fics where it acts like it's canon that Monoma does that. It's actually, like, I don't know. Anyways, ignore me, because that was actually Shinso. But I'm gonna get right into it. When Aizawa walked into Class 1A the next day, he was met with the sight of the most orderly classroom he had seen in all his years of teaching. At first, he'd like to have attributed the order to his godson, or rather to the class rep, but that wouldn't explain the lack of eye contact he got from the class, apart from Midoriya, who seemed chipper as usual. Aizawa's eyes caught Kaminari's for a second, only for the boy to yelp and quickly turn his head to be facing his desk, neck ramrod straight. Oh well. They must still be spooked from the attack yesterday. Morning to you all, Aizawa greeted. Now that everyone's here, we'll get started with today's lesson. But, Sensei, Izuku piped up, Sue's not here yet. The class turned to the room's lone, empty desk, and sure enough, Suyu was nowhere to be seen. If you mean Asui, she is taking a mental health day. Not all scars are physical, and it's only natural for you to feel anxious after what you've just been through. The class looked at the empty seat worriedly, Uraraka and Izuku seeming especially anxious hearing the news. But look on the bright side, the teacher continued. In a few short days, UA will be holding the sports festival. The oppressive atmosphere quickly turned into cheers. Feeling that it was too early in the morning to deal with this, Aizawa sent his students a Quirk-infused glare to shut them up, but the mere sight of his red eyes turned their cheering into screaming. And then silence. Bewildered, the man cut off erasure. Observing the chaotic scene, he saw that all his students but Ida, Todoroki, Bakugo, and Izuku were all taking defensive postures, most covering their heads or hiding out of sight. Kaminari in particular was fully under his desk, quaking in his boots. The hero just stood still, bewildered. Eventually he came to a conclusion. I don't know what they're feeding kids these days. Back in my day, when I erased someone's quirk, they called me a villain at worst. Is this the quirk singularity theory I've heard about? It's like they're as attached to their quirks as they are to their limbs. All right, back to your seats. Kaminari flew back into his chair so fast you'd think he had a time-stopping quirk. Today's lesson is on quirk discrimination and ethics. After the following 4-hour lecture, lunch, math class with ectoplasm, and English with present Mike, the end of the day bell rang. Before the Class 1A students made to leave, the door to their classroom burst open. In the open doorway stood the smug form of Nato Monoma, leading a pack of students from the first-year classes. Attention wannabe heroes, the blonde boy announced. I'm sure you heard about the upcoming sports festival, so I'm here to remind you not to get any big heads over your little villain attack, because Class 1B is gonna come out on top. Ida was furious at the boy's declaration, and looked to be about to bite back, but was beaten to the punch by Izuku? Don't you realize how insensitive that is? Izuku asked calmly, standing from his seat and facing Monoma. One of our classmates is no longer with us. Izuku gestured to Suyu's empty chair, and the blood drained from Monoma's face. Do you have any idea what that's like for us? For me? The boy asked, shaking his head sadly. Of course, Suyu wasn't dead, and Izuku knew it. He was referring to the fact that since Suyu was out of class that day, he had to take notes on Aizawa's lecture and all the other classes for her. His hand twinged in pain from all the furious scribbling he had done. Maybe next time, remember that your words have consequences. Izuku sat down, leaving the room speechless. Class 1A was stunned at what appeared to be a blatant lie, although Aizawa was always happy to mess with Vlad and his brood. And the hallway crowd tried to stutter out some form of an apology, claiming that they didn't know. Even Monoma seemed too stunned to come up with a rude comeback. "Guess that means a spot opened up for me," a voice said from the back of the crowd. Pushing himself to the front, Shinso Hitoshi appeared. "You hero students should watch out, because I'm going to beat you all in the sports festival." Taking one final look over Class 1A, Hitoshi said, "I came to see potential heroes, but all I see is a bunch of egomaniacs. The only one I respect is that one." Hitoshi pointed a finger at Izuku, who made a face and thought, "What did I do?" "Consider this my declaration of war." With that, Hitoshi turned and walked away, leaving a room of stunned students in a hallway of stunned, abashed students. Yes, welcome in, dear. Sue is in her room, resting," Belle Asui greeted. Uraraka stood on her doorstep, wriggling her hands nervously. "Satsuki will show you there." A young girl peeked out from behind her mother and smiled at Uraraka. "You're Sue's friend, right? Come on, her room's over this way, girl." Uraraka nodded politely at her host and slipped off her shoes at the door. Padding softly down the hall, decorated heavily with frog and toad-themed decor, the pair stopped at a door labeled Suyu, with a cartoonish frog sticker on the nameplate, emphasizing the label. "This is her room," Satsuki said. "Now, I'm gonna go play video games. Saturday doesn't last forever, and this sounds boring." Turning, the girl skipped off down the hall away from Uraraka. "I guess Sue's brutal honesty runs in the family," Uraraka giggled to herself. She knocked on the door, and after a moment a quiet voice responded. "Come in, girl," Suyu croaked. Uraraka cracked the door open and noticed that the light was off. She walked in quietly, and a humidifier must have been running because it felt like walking into a curtain of sweat. "Sue?" Uraraka asked quietly, spotting what looked to be a human-shaped mound under the blankets on her bed in the dimly lit room. "Uraraka, I didn't know it was you. Sorry, I usually turn off the climate when I have guests," Suyu said, lifting the blankets around her head to reveal her face. Suyu's eyes were puffy and red, like she'd been crying recently. "Are you okay? You didn't come into class yesterday, so I was worried. Izuku made you notes." Suyu flinched at the name, though it went unnoticed as Uraraka reached into her bag and pulled out a thin folder of papers. "I couldn't face him. Not after the attack," Suyu said. "Face who?" Uraraka placed the notes on her friend's desk. I thought you just needed a mental health day." Suyu shook her head. "At the USJ, Midoriya controlled that monster. I think he was involved with the villains, Garo." Uraraka felt the news hit her like a truck. Sure, Izuku might come off as strange, but to associate with villains? No, wait. She could totally see it. Still, Uraraka tried to defend her friend. He was controlling a monster, but that's just what his quirk does, right? Suyu shook her head. "No, he didn't summon this one. It was the big bird monster that came with the villains. It was what injured Aizawa-sensei, and it..." The girl's voice cracked as she struggled to continue. "I watched. It ripped the arms off of every single villain in there. It wasn't just a villain. It was a monster." Suyu turned her face to her friend and locked eyes directly with the girl. "And Midoriya controlled it. He told it to disarm them, and it did. Then he told it to leave. That's why it escaped." Uraraka shook her head defiantly. "No! Aizawa was the one who took off those villains' arms. Sero told me." "What?" Uraraka asked, as the silence between the two stretched on for too long. No, it's just that I thought I heard you say that our teacher brutally injured several dozen villains. I must have something in my ear, Carol," Suyu said, tapping her ear as if to shake out the mystery blockage. "Well, yeah, Like he did to Midoriya during the Quirk apprehension exam. His quirk removes limbs. That's why he's called Erase Your Head, Uraraka said. Suyu tilted her head. No, his name is Eraserhead. His quirk is Erasure, and it erases quirks. I'm not sure why Erasure had that effect on Midoriya, Caro, but he wasn't responsible for the USJ villains. Do you really think UA would employ a hero who has no regard for collateral damage? When you put it that way, Uraraka laughed awkwardly. The point is, Suyu continued, getting the conversation back on track, is that Midoriya isn't as innocent as he says he is, Caro. I'd be careful around him from now on. Uraraka gulped. If you say so, Sue. The girl didn't totally believe Suyu's story just yet, but she did plan on having a long chat with Izuku the next time they met. She was going to get to the bottom of this. And that's the end of this chapter. I'll be moving on to the next chapter. There were no SCPs I feel the need to explain for that chapter. So this will be chapter 26. And the crowd is confused. Here's the summary. Izuku kicks off the sports festival with a rousing speech, and the Transformers fandom gets a surprise crossover. The crowd cheered with a roar of applause as President Mike declared the opening of UA's 48th annual sports festival. All right, listeners, now without further ado, let's welcome the first-year students. Bringing in the class with an introductory speech is this year's highest scorer on the entrance exams, the voice hero yelled, voice ringing clear over the cacophony in the bleachers. Izuku walked down the long hallway leading to the stadium, followed by the rest of the first-year students. As he approached the podium where Midnight was holding a microphone, his legs shook and a bead of sweat ran down his brow. This year's top scorer was Izuku Midoriya, Mike announced and paused to give the crowd a few seconds to cheer. This little listener actually beat the record set by All Might with a staggering point total of... How do you even pronounce this number? The whispered voice of President Mike carried over the speakers. That is a lot of zeros. Oh, redacted. That's only the first page. How many pages are in that folder? Is it labeled Folder 1? A gruff voice responded, whom the crowd didn't recognize but that belonged to Aizawa Shoda, underground hero and teacher of Class 1A. Ahem, Mike cleared his throat and made to continue. The point is, this little listener got a whole load of points. So without further ado, introducing Izuku Midoriya. That's a whole lot of people, Izuku thought to himself as he stepped up the podium. The boy took the offered mic and cleared his throat. He didn't hear it over the speakers, so he tapped the microphone, and immediately a staticky screech resounded over the sound system. Half the crowd reached to cover their ears, and the other half just laughed. Izuku laughed awkwardly along with the crowd. Hi, everyone. My name's Izuku, the boy started. I'm nervous to come up here. There's a whole lot of you. He chuckled, and the crowd laughed along. Don't worry, you're doing great, the voice of a stranger yelled from the crowd. Others in the stands were eager to agree, each shouting their encouragement for the boy. Thanks, that means a lot, Izuku said. He felt a tear prick his eye and had to remember not to cry while he had an audience of millions. I haven't heard a lot of encouragement from strangers in my life, especially because of my quirk. With that, Izuku's face grew more serious, and the crowd was quieted, all eyes and ears on the boy. Those who knew Izuku personally leaned forwards. Shinso Hitoshi was watching the speech with wide eyes, and All Might's hand clenched into a fist, apparently holding back the urge to stop the speech before it got any further. When I was younger, no, even now, people have called me a villain just for being born with what they thought was a villainous quirk. I've been bullied since I was 4, and even my oldest friend never stuck up for me. Izuku turned to look at Katsuki, who got angry when the boy's gaze landed on him. I'm not your frickin' friend, nerd! The blonde shouted. He didn't have a microphone, but he was loud enough that the nearest members of the crowd's faces screwed up, and some even began to boo him. But still, Izuku continued, I knew I could always rely on my friends, so even when people called me a villain, or a monster, or a freak, I knew that my buddies had my back. My message to all of you today is that today's victor won't win because of their quirk, but because of their heroic spirit. The boy lifted a fist into the air, the classic pose of the number one hero. So let's get out there and win. Plus ultra. The crowd exploded into cheering. Assuming the speech was done, President Mike continued his commentary. All right then, let's turn to midnight for our first event. Izuku cut the hero off. And now a word from my friends who carried me this whole way. It's only fair I give them a chance to speak as well, after all. From a shady corner, unseen by students or the crowd, stepped a tall, dark figure. Its limbs were overly lanky and its face was too dark to see properly, even under the harsh stadium lights. When Katsuki saw the figure, his arms lit up in a series of explosions as he threw himself backwards at speeds easily twice his record during the Quirk apprehension exam. When he hit the wall, he took a defensive stance, eyes not leaving the figure for a single moment. Even with all the ruckus, however, the figure walked unbothered on long limbs up to the podium where Izuku waited. He offered it his microphone as Midnight took 2 large steps backwards. "Here, uncle," the boy said as he handed it off. Izuku's uncle took the proffered mic and held it up near where its mouth should be. It screeched, a harsh, staticky voice pouring from the creature's face as it spoke. After it was done, the uncle handed the mic back to his nephew and proceeded to stride back down to his corner, slipping into the shadows like he belonged there. "Thanks, uncle. That was beautiful." Izuku wiped a tear from his eye. "Next up is my best bud, Rover." "Wait, what?" President Mike said before stopping himself. "Technically speaking, UA's open learning policy didn't just allow teachers to do things like exams on day 1, but it also meant long-standing traditions like allowing the student representative to use their speech however they wanted. Thinking back, Mike remembered how in his 3rd year, the rep had spent 15 minutes ranting about his favorite anime before walking off stage. So, nobody could do a thing as Izuku welcomed a screeching, organ-shaped thing up to the stage. It slobbered and screamed into the mic for a solid minute, and then just left. And next up were a pogo stick and that new high-tech chair from Recovery Girl's office that she claimed was a support item. They didn't speak, they just sat there in silence while Izuku held the microphone up to them and nodded sagely. The crowd sat in stunned silence for the next 15 minutes as the boy brought out another dozen guest speakers, each more incomprehensible than the last. Finally, Izuku ushered off the stage a floating orb that appeared to be made of human flesh, and raised the microphone to speak once more. "Thank you to all of my friends. I don't know where I'd be today if not for them. Really, you have no idea how much your support means to me," he spoke. Then he handed the microphone back to a wide-eyed Midnight and walked down the steps to his waiting classmates. He wished he could have given more of his friends an opportunity to speak, but his head was getting an ache that signaled his quirk overuse. The other classmates gave him a wide berth. "All right then," President Mike coughed. "What an interesting speech from this year's first-year representative and his unique friends. I'm regretting my decision to co-host with you more and more every second," Aizawa said. "Aw, is someone a grumpy pants?" Mike responded, provoking a capture scarf smack from his friend. "Ouch! All right. For real this time. Please turn your attention to Miss Midnight for the first event." A large, multicolored wheel was brought up to stage beside Midnight. "Is everyone excited?" the hero asked, cracking her whip in the air. The crowd cheered loudly, ready to get to the day's action. "The first event of the day is..." Midnight grabbed the edge of the wheel and gave it a spin. Around and around it went until it slowed to a stop on a cartoony pictograph of Cementos on a pyramid. "King of the Hill," she announced. The crowd exploded into applause, eager to see the event in question. In the span of a few minutes, the ground in the center of the arena was transformed into a concrete hill, hundreds of feet in diameter, like an upside-down ice cream cone with Cementos at the peak. Ectoplasm ushered the crowd of first-year students into place at the base of the structure. Izuku shuffled his feet in place and looked around. He couldn't recognize many people he knew on his end of the hill, but he did spot Sero and Ida, and Katsuki's spiky hair sticking up in the crowd. Midnight began to explain the rules. The goal of this event is to stay on the hill when the timer runs out. If you're on the ground when the clock hits 0, you're eliminated. The participants buzzed. Some started bragging that this would be easy or a piece of cake. Midnight grinned wickedly. But don't think that this will be easy, because Cementos up there will be doing everything in his power to toss you off. Also, you'll need to be wary of your classmates, because they'll be doing whatever they can to thin out the competition. Those that were bragging gulped, slowly coming to realize they might not be cut out for this. So, if you're all ready for a blood-pumping experience, then on your marks, get set, go. Midnight cracked her whip, and the circle of students mobbed towards the hill, all pushing to lock in their place on its surface. When some students, Mineta, Sero, and Bondo from Class 1B, for example, had quirks perfect for this, immediately bonding themselves to the surface of the hill, Izuku stayed back, unsure. Off the top of his head, he couldn't think of any friends right for the job. Izuku's choice to hang back ended up being the right one, as dozens of concrete columns sprung up from the hill like springs out of an old mattress, sending the students on them flying. Some who were able to evade or stick themselves tightly to the columns were fine, but Izuku realized he wouldn't make it out of this challenge unscathed, not without help. So, with no other options, Izuku called for friends. And Reigo Kaneki from Class 1B is sent flying, Present Mike screeched as the concrete pillar tossed the girl into the air. I'm impressed with the quick thinking of the Class 1A representative. Not many could pull off a tricky maneuver like that using a hot glue gun, duct tape, and an entire World War II tank, Aizawa said, sounding impressed for the first time in his commentary. Izuku blinked and saw a booklet in his hand. It was labeled, "These 3 yoga poses will open a radical new world of possibilities." The boy opened the pamphlet and began to read, unbothered as yet another child was sent careening past him, the wind only ruffling the corners of his booklet. Look there! Izuku Midoriya appears to be reading! Maybe he doesn't view this event as challenging enough, Present Mike supposed. Aizawa huffed at his coworker. Midoriya is a highly motivated individual. I highly doubt that he would give up this early in the game. It's probably just a part of his plan. Izuku slammed the book shut as the teacher finished his remarks. Thanks for the help, he said to the pamphlet as he placed it on the ground with a friendly pat. Izuku stretched into a backbend, cupping his hands into the shape of an O, and then twisted his neck and back until he was laying supine, arms in the air. The little listener is doing yoga? Present Mike said, confusion etching his words. Izuku's methods were explained momentarily, though, as he stretched into the final pose, his arms and legs crisscrossing over his core. As he stretched, his body changed. His arms widened and took on a metallic appearance, and his head stretched out in the shape of a tire. Within moments, the space where a 14-year-old boy once sat was taken up by a black and white Suzuki B-King motorcycle, with pink accents. Like a rocket, the motorcycle was off, ignoring the cries of the commentators and the cheering of the crowd. Now his only goal was speed. Nearby students cried out in shock as the vehicle sped by them, cutting through the crowd like butter as it reached the hill and began to climb it. When a nearby concrete pillar rose into the air before the boy, instead of dodging it, he slammed its corner with his rear tire and used it to propel himself further into the air, soaring above the heads of his shocked peers. To be totally legit, that is radical. An absolute gnarly beast on wheels, Aizawa remarked dryly. Radical indeed, my brother, Mike agreed. Izuku continued to zip past the competition, weaving in and out of the few students who had managed to climb this high, and dodging the obstacles Cementos sent his way. Stealing a glance at the clock behind himself through his rearview mirrors, he saw that there were a mere 30 seconds remaining. Your reign of terror ends here to the max, Midoriya, the voice of Yaoyorozu Momo said, and Izuku looked back in front of himself to see the form of the girl peeking out from a full-sized panzer. The girl ducked back down inside her vehicle, and Izuku could hear a rocket being loaded into the barrel of the machine. Unfazed, Izuku narrowed his windshield guards together as if they were eyebrows, and raced ever closer to the tank. 10 seconds on the clock, Present Mike announced. Izuku's motor throttled, but he kept his collision course for the tank, like the world's highest stakes game of chicken. 5, the voice of the hero announced. Izuku was in 100 feet of the girl now, but he kept racing to the top of the hill, ever facing his adversary. 4, a faint click could be heard from the tank. 3, an explosion ripped through the barrel of the weapon, and the tank lurched as it was lifted slightly in the air by the blast. A missile, a few inches in diameter, careened towards the oncoming vehicle. Thinking quickly, Izuku executed the maneuver he had planned for this instant, harshly hitting his brake for his front tire and sending himself flipping into the air wildly, a maneuver only possible with the speed he had built up playing chicken. Time seemed to freeze in that instant, the crowd's eyebrows raised high as the missile zoomed towards the motorcycle, which was flying through the air. Just barely, by a hair's width, the two flying objects managed to dodge the other, Izuku's rear tire soaring just barely above the incendiary device. 2! The missile struck just behind Izuku, landing directly in the face of Kirishima, who had anticipated this and had his arms raised defensively in front of himself, skin rough and rocky in a heroic effort to protect himself and his classmates. The bomb exploded, and Izuku was sent flying ever faster forwards, tossed by the force of the explosion until he was spinning wildly in the air, careening for the ground quickly. The cycle hit the ground, skidding and sliding down the hill, the out-of-bounds area just yards away. 1! Izuku's tires squealed wildly, seeking purchase on anything that could stop his path towards elimination. Repeatedly, his tires hit some kind of round obstacle that slowed his momentum, but the force of gravity and the explosion continued to carry him down the hill regardless. Suddenly, he found himself slamming into something dense but soft, wheel hanging in the air, just barely holding onto his spot on the hill. And that's it! President Mike screamed, Quirk activating and causing the nearby speakers to pop. In a stunning last-minute upset, Yaoyorozu Momo sent out a surprise attack that knocked 6 contestants out of bounds. Luckily for the radical Midoriya, he received a surprise assist from Mineta Minoru and will be moving forward to the second round. Izuku tilted his chassis as far down as he could to the side and saw the unconscious form of Mineta underneath himself. It appeared that the minefield of sticky balls the boy had laid down had stopped the motorcycle's slide. Mineta himself had heroically saved Izuku from an elimination. Izuku allowed himself to relax, tires sagging and headlights clicking off. It wasn't easy, but he had managed to survive his first ever event at UA's world-famous sports festival. He can only imagine what else the day had in store for him. And that's the end of this chapter. It was a doozy. I remember spending so much time planning this arc. There are dozens of tables and graphs and matchups for events. There's also over a dozen OCs that have been made for this arc of the story. So yeah. Also, I apologize for the fact that I did not I was writing in Zalgo text for what the uncle said during this part of the story. So when I was looking back on my notes, I didn't even remember what I was trying to have him say, only that it was in Spanish, I think, or in just you can go back and look at the fic if you want to decode what the uncle actually said. Mostly I just was doing it sort of as nonsense and adding some vocal blur. Regardless, the list of SCPs that were in this chapter was SCP-783, The Crooked Man, SCP-058, Rover, SCP-1300, one of my favorites, The Liquid Surgeon, SCP-677, The Unpredictable Pogo Stick, SCP-002, The Living Room, and SCP-5663, The Yoga Poses, which cause you to transform into vehicles Transformers style. It also has mimetic effects that causes people to describe the user only ever in 70s slang. It is to date, I think, one of the wildest SCPs that I know of. It was a trip to read that one. But yeah, thank you all so much for listening. I hope you're enjoying so far. I do hope to get the next chapter out sometime by next month. So thank you all so much for listening. Patch out.